right, hello. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to more content. Welcome back to more deep diving into these legislation bills with Callisto. All right, guys. So, funny thing about me, I know I've mentioned this before. I've talked about my anxiety disorder. I know I probably talk about it a lot, and I don't know, some of you might be like, oh my gosh, you talked about it so much. Because I grew up in a family where we didn't talk about it. I grew up in, we're a family, an environment that it was very stigmatized. Of race seeing like a weakness or just something like we don't address, right? And my family, is with many families, go through their trauma. I've seen the way it affects me. Oh, obviously, right? I've experienced how it affects me. I experienced how it affects those around me. I've seen what happens with unchecked baggage and unaddressed issues, and what different places it can lead. And I don't want that to be part of my cycle as I get older. So I talk about it. I talk about it at work. I talk about it because I've also been in not just my family, but I've been in a job environment that really retaliated against that, and I experienced that. That was rough, to put it lightly. I feel like that shows another area. And I didn't know that a lot of people still experience that, which is evidence it shows that that's another area that when power and illegal actions and retaliation, all of those in a fun little bag go unchecked, what that can do to environments, what that can do to people. And so all of that, I really tried to talk about it, right? So part of my anxiety disorder has that little OCD accompanied with it. And which a lot of people have those. When you have one, you have the other. Not all the time, of course. A lot of people have their different experiences, but like it's very common. And OCD it was like one of those things I always had that was like a little quirk growing up, right? That I would be like, oh, that's just a funny thing. Oh, that's just odd. She's a little odd. And it didn't really affect my like quality of life. It was just like a weird thing, right? Until I grew into like my mid-20s, and then it started to become really like prevalent, and that's when I started uncovering more about it, what it was, at that time, and even many years after, in my perspective, what the fuck was wrong with me. And it's like it can be really debilitating. And so anyways, a part of that is like when I get sick, my mind goes to like the worst case scenarios, right? And it plays through like everything. So like and the bad thing about my anxiety disorder is one of the ways that it affects me strongly is I get sick. It's like it physically affects my body when I get really anxious, when I get really stressed out, and I feel sick all the time because of it. And it's just something that I still deal with. And I found different things to kind of like, over the years, I found different things to kind of lighten it up, not lighten it up, alleviate that, but not something that's very long-term manageable. So I'm still struggling, right? And so it's like a fucking cycle, right? Like you get sick because your anxiety, and then your OCD goes on overdrive, and then it just makes you more stressed out. So anyways, and then I'm always scared like that I'm gonna end up, part of the reason why I took so long to like go to the doctor, and even now like I haven't really experienced like it's always the same test when I go in, and then it just stops, right? It's like it's weird because it's like you go to the doctor, you tell them what's wrong, they run the same initial test, and then you don't hear from them. And it's like am I supposed to just bug you to correctly diagnose me and help me? Apparently. I mean, yeah, that actually happens a lot, right? But I'm just like, I get so tired that you just don't want to go through those things anymore. But I know I got to go back. And whenever I try to make an appointment, because of our current healthcare system, you got appointments months out. So it's like, fuck me. Okay, well, that's just manage until then, right? And manage until you make the appointment and the time comes. And and then I end up thinking, God, I'm going to go to and I don't even want to go to the doctor, right? Because I'm always afraid that it's going to be like, oh God, you have cancer or some shit like that. And I've had my gallbladder taken out. I've been through surgery. I've had like really bad medical incidents. And I'm like, that stuff does not help, right? Because it just like with OCD thing, anything that could possibly latch on and feed those fears, it does. And people have a hard time, even people around me have a hard time understanding the thought process. And because the thing is like OCD can affect the people around you, because the way it affects you, it can affect the people around you. So it's not easy It's really not. And people are people. They're not always understanding because, it's hard to be understanding of something you really don't go through yourself. And it's just like, I don't know if anybody out there actually relates to any of that. You're not alone. And we just got to keep going, man. We just got to keep pushing through. And I have like belief that I'll figure something out that's like, I'll find something that actually helps, like that fits me, the right, not so much the right medication, but like just the right things that'll help my quality of life in terms of the anxiety and the way it affects me. But meanwhile, I talk about it a lot because I'm trying to be communicative, especially if I have like days that like I feel completely fucking wrecked. I want to be able to say I'm going to be taking a mental health day, which is still a freaking struggle for me. Like, it became easier in that job I just mentioned a little earlier with a bad environment. It became easier because I hated that environment, and it was retaliation, misery, it was shit. So it was easier in that aspect to be like, I'm going to be out for mental health day and fuck you, But that became easier to like, but like with places you don't want to do that. So it's like hard to still communicate that. It's just not easy to feel comfortable in talking about something you felt so uncomfortable with for so long, right? So it's still a journey. But anyways, that's my opening. That's my probably see, here's the thing. It's like whenever you talk online, you also want to be careful, right? With what, like, not or giving too much information. But I feel like this is one of the things that you need to. So I don't know. Some of you might feel like, oh, that's oversharing. And some of you may actually appreciate it. I don't know. But I kind of feel like it might be good. So I'm going to keep doing it. But anyways, guys, the next bill we have HR 537, also called the Increased Housing Affordability Act. So this one actually sounds like it has a good purpose. Okay. And one thing I really liked about this was that this is one of the bills Mickey Sherrill brought forth. And we know who Mickey Sherrill is. She's the rep for New Jersey, District 11, 116th through 119th, Democratic Party. She ran recently against Jack Ciattarelli and won. So yeah, I think this is a really cool one to go over because it's actually getting to start tracking these newly elected reps into their career and to see what they actually do and see if they meet those promises that they made. And it's not like they're going to meet every promise because you can't, right? You logistically, time related to time, or just the backlash. I mean, there's just so many factors that make it almost impossible to say you're going to meet all your goals 100%. But so I don't expect that, but I do expect you to meet a good amount of them and to be doing the work that you promised, So Mickey Sherrill. All right. So obviously sponsor. This was introduced January 16th, 2025, Committee's House Ways and Means Financial Services. Latest action, House, March 5th, 2026. Assuming first sponsorship. This I thought was interesting. Mr. Magaziner asked unanimous consent that he may be hereafter be considered as the first sponsor of HR 537, a bill originally introduced by Representative Sherrill for the purpose of adding co-sponsors and requesting reprintings pursuant to Clause 7 of Rule 12, agreed to without objection. So that's interesting. I don't see that. I haven't seen that like at all in these bills. But also I'm still going through them. I haven't seen every bill, obviously. So HR 537, to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to provide tax credits for the conversion of commercial buildings to residential units, to provide support and technical assistance to state and local housing agencies, to identify and advance housing conversion opportunities to underutilized commercial buildings and for other purposes. So basically, you look at underutilized commercial buildings, and this is the opportunity to convert them into residential units and as you go through this, you'll see for limited or people with income limitations. Okay. And this is basically going to be a bill that's crediting companies or individuals, I guess, a certain amount for taking on this work and for turning these into residential units. So, in the House of Representatives, January 16th, 2025, Ms. Sherrill introduced the following bill, which was referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, and in addition to the Committee on Financial Services, for a period to be subsequently determined by the Speaker, in each case for consideration of such provisions as fall within the jurisdiction of the committee concerned. A bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to provide tax credits for the conversion of commercial buildings to residential units, to provide support and technical assistance, I like this part too, to state and local housing agencies to identify and advance housing conversion opportunities for underutilized commercial buildings and for other purposes. Again, you're not going to list like every purpose if there's going to be a lot of little different things that you can do, especially from like an administrative standpoint. But like, I don't know. I'm just so sus about every politician now that when I see and for other purposes, I'm like, what other purposes? That's just my paranoid brain, guys. All right, be enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled. Section 1, short title. As always, we have a short title for these. This one, I feel like as I'm reading this, even the shorter version, you can tell that this is brought forward by a Democrat and not a Republican, because a majority of the Republican bill, or almost all the Republican bills I've gone through, their short titles are just like something you would hear from from the mouth of a MAGA person. All right. This act may be cited as the Incentivizing New Conversions to Residential Entities to Accelerate Supply and Expand Housing Affordability Act, or the Increase Housing Affordability Act. Section 2, Commercial to Residential Credit. A. In general, Section 46 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by redesigning paragraph 7 as paragraph 8, by redesigning the Section 6 relating to the Advancing Manufacturing Investment Credits as paragraph 7, by striking "and" at the end of paragraph 7, so redesigned, by striking the period at the end of paragraph 8, as so redesigned, and inserting "and," and by adding at the end of the following new paragraph. Okay, so first of all, this is what they're talking about this is what they're referencing. 46, amount of credit. For purposes of Section 38, the amount of the investment credit determined under this section for any taxable year shall be the sum of the rehabilitation credit, the energy credit, the qualifying advanced coal project credit, the qualifying gasification project credit, the qualifying advanced energy project credit, the advanced manufacturing investment credit, the clean electricity investment credit. And then you saw that at the end of 7, they're going to replace it with Section 8 by redesigning paragraph 6 as paragraph 7, by striking "and" at the end of the paragraph, by striking the period at the end of paragraph 8, which is the new 8, and then inserting "and" then adding this, the commercial to residential credit. So it's a little like, so we're just not going to have a 6 anymore? Yeah, that's interesting. Anyways, and then 9 is going to be the commercial to residential credit. So it's adding what this whole bill is going to be doing to that, okay? B, amount of credit. Subpart E of Part 4 of Subchapter A of Chapter 1 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by inserting after Section 48E the following new section. Okay, so this is the new stuff they're going to be adding to the Internal Revenue Code as well. That's going to basically pave the way for this bill, right? Section 48F, commercial to residential credit. A, in general, for purposes of Section 46, the commercial to residential credit for any taxable year is equal to 15% of the qualified conversion expenditures with respect to a qualified converted building. I mean, so when you think about the amount of money that goes into this, that's a lot of money. Or that's a lot of credit. Okay. B, limitation on credit amount. The credit determined under subsection A may not exceed 1, $200,000 per new residential housing unit, and 2, $10 million per qualified converted building. C, when expenditures taken into account, 1, in general, qualified conversion expenditures with respect to any qualified converted building shall be taken into account for the taxable year in which such qualified converted building is placed in service. 2, coordination with subsection E. The amount which would, but for this subparagraph, be taken into account under subparagraph A with respect to any qualified converted building shall be reduced, but not below 0, by any amount of qualified conversion expenditures taken into account under subsection E by the taxpayer or predecessor of the taxpayer. or in the case of a sale and leaseback described in Section 50A2C by the leasee, to the extent any amount so taken into account has not been required to be recaptured under Section 50A. Bonus credits. Affordable housing bonus credit. A. In general, in the case of a qualified converted building which has been converted to a majority rental residential use and which satisfies the requirement under subparagraph B, the amount of the credit determined under subsection A, determined without regard to this subsection, and the limitation on credit amount described in subsection B, determined without regard to this subsection, with respect to such building, shall each be increased by an amount equal to 1. In the case of a qualified converted building, 25% or more of the residential units of which are both rent restricted and occupied by individuals whose income does not exceed 100% of area median income, 10% of such amounts. So basically, 25% of that converted building has to be used for residential units that are both rent restricted and occupied by individuals whose income does not exceed 100% of area median income for you to get 10% bonus credits of such amounts. And then 2, in the case of a qualified converted building, 25% or more of the residential units of which are both rent restricted, and occupied by individuals whose income does not exceed 80% of area median income, 15% of such amounts. So you get 15% bonus for using at least 25% of this for residential units, but the people living there, their income does not exceed 80% of the area median income. So 3, in the case of a qualified converted building, again, 25% or more of the residential units of which are both rent restricted and occupied by individuals whose income does not exceed 60% of area median income, 20% of such amounts. Okay, so when I read this, and I want to give you guys a better picture, because when I read this, it made me think, I know how expensive this area of New Mexico I live in, okay? And I was like, what is the area median income here? And lo and behold, $85,755 to $89,596 in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. That makes sense because it is incredibly expensive to live in this area, in this, like, not even suburb, but like a subdivision, or not, what would you call, I'm like blanking on the term, but it's like not the main city, but like the surrounding areas, right? This is what it is. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. And then I thought, okay, so we were looking at moving back to Albuquerque, and I was like, what is the area median for Albuquerque? Because that has to be lower, because cost of living in terms of house and apartment rentals are but significantly cheaper. Okay, it makes a difference in Albuquerque. So you look at Albuquerque, $67,995 to $68,317 a year. It's lower, makes sense. It is still very high, in terms of what people actually, what the household brings in general, because of what jobs pay, okay, versus what's considered the median income. And it's really interesting because while the median income goes higher, showing that there is job growth, everything has gotten way more expensive. That gap isn't closing. It's like, let me put it in terms of, you have expensive groceries, you have expensive gas, right? And so government decides, okay, we're going to raise the minimum wage to meet that so people can afford it. But here's the thing, they raise the minimum wage, but then it doesn't close that gap, because what ends up happening is gas and groceries and everything around you raises its price as well. So it's like that gap is still there, but it's just like moving, both sides are moving positions up. So it doesn't actually change anything. And so in terms of this, I would be considered having under the median income in Albuquerque and definitely in Rio Rancho. And then I thought, okay, well, where I was living outside Austin we both had full-time jobs. We both, even he would get, at times he would get overtime. And I was thinking, but we still struggled because things were still expensive in that area. What was the median income? Kyle median income worse than here, which makes sense because when we came here, it was still expensive, but it wasn't as expensive, but still way too expensive. $89,645 to $90,323. I want you to tell me how many couples you know that actually make, or I want you to tell me how many households you know actually make that much a year, combined income. That's insane. That's insane. Which shows that there's more of a need for these kind of housing projects. Anyways, that's just to give you kind of like my own personal experience with that, so you can kind of understand more like what's going to qualify under this. So like meeting 60% of that, meeting 80% of that, meeting 100%, does not exceed 100% of that. That would put you in where you would qualify for rent restricted places. That to me is mind-boggling for many reasons. But okay, we're going to go on. Okay. B, rent and income limitation. For purposes of subparagraph A, rules similar to the rules of section 42G shall apply to determine whether a unit is rent restricted. Treatment of units occupied by individuals whose incomes rise above the limit, and treatment of units where federal rent assistance is reduced as tenants' income increases. So whenever people get really close or really slightly above, there's going to actually they're trying to account for actually having rules for that. 2, prevailing wage bonus credit. A, in general, in the case of any qualified converted building with respect to which the taxpayer certifies to the secretary that the taxpayer satisfied the requirement of subparagraph B with respect to the conversion process, the amount of the credit determined under subsection A, determined without regard to the subsection, and the limitation on the credit amount described in subsection B, determined without regard to the subsection, with respect to such building shall each be increased by an amount equal to 15% of such amounts. So there's a lot of opportunity, or there's a lot of reasons why a business would want to take this on. And you're also, I mean, we're still living in America. You also think about this is good PR. This is good PR for businesses that take this up. B, prevailing wage requirement. The requirement described in this subparagraph is satisfied with respect to any conversion if all laborers or mechanics employed by the taxpayer or any contractor or subcontractor of the taxpayer to carry out the conversion were paid wages at rates not less than the prevailing rates for construction, alteration, or repair of a similar character in the locality in which such project is located, as most recently determined by the Secretary of Labor in accordance with subchapter 4 of Chapter 31 of Title 40 United States Code. And then we get to E, definitions. 1, qualified converted building. A, in general, the term qualified converted building means any building and its structural components if 1, prior to conversion, such building was non-residential real property as defined in section 168, which was leased or available for lease to office tenants. Okay, so non-residential real property as defined in section 168 means property which is not residential rental property or property with a class life of less than 27.5 years. Okay. Such building has been substantially converted from an office use to a residential or residential retail mixed use. Such building was initially placed in service at least 15 years before the beginning of the conversion, and depreciation or amortization in lieu of depreciation is allowable with respect to such building. Okay, and then we get to B, substantially converted defined. 1. In general, for purposes of paragraph 1A2, a building shall be treated as having been substantially converted only if the qualified conversion expenditures during the 24-month period selected by the taxpayer at the time and in the manner prescribed by regulation and ending with or within the taxable year exceed the greater of the adjusted basis of such building and its structural components, or $15,000. The adjusted basis of the building and its structural components shall be determined as of the beginning of the first day of such 24-month period or of the holding period of the building, whichever is later. For purposes of the preceding sentence, the determination of the beginning of the holding period shall be made without regard to any reconstruction by the taxpayer in connection with the conversion. 2. Special rule for phased conversion. In the case of any conversion which may reasonably be expected to be completed in phases set forth in architectural plans and specifications completed before the conversion begins, Clause 1 shall be applied by substituting 16-month period for 24-month period. 3. The Secretary shall prescribe by regulation rules for applying this subparagraph to leases. C. Reconstruction. Conversion includes reconstruction. 2. Qualified conversion expenditures defined. A. In general, for purposes of subsection A, the term qualified conversion expenditures means any amount properly chargeable to capital amount. 1. For property for which depreciation is allowable under section 168, and which is 1. Non-residential real property, as defined in section 168. 2. Residential rental property, as defined in section 168. Okay, residential rental property means any building or structure if 80% or more of the gross rental income from such buildings or structure for the taxable year is rental income from dwelling units. 3. An additional or improvement to property described in clause 1 or 2. And 2. In connection with the conversion of a qualified converted building. B. Certain expenditures not included. The term qualified conversion expenditures does not include 1. Straight line depreciation must be used. Any expenditure with respect to which the taxpayer does not use the straight line method over a recovery period determined under subsection C or G of section 168. The preceding sentence shall not apply to any expenditure to the extent the alternative depreciation system of section 168G applies to such expenditure by reason of subparagraph B or C of section 168G1. So section G, alternative depreciation system for certain property. 1. In general, in the case of any tangible property which during the taxable year is used predominantly outside the U.S., any tax-exempt use property, any tax-exempt bond finance property, and any imported property covered by an executive order under paragraph 6. And then 2. Cost of acquisition, the cost of acquiring any building or interest therein. Enlargements. Any expenditure attributable to the enlargement, I don't know why I had a hard time saying that, enlargement of an existing building. 4. Tax-exempt use property. Any expenditure in connection with the conversion of a building which is allocable to the portion of such property which is or may reasonably be expected to be tax-exempt use property within the meaning of section 168H, except that. So the meaning of 168H says tax-exempt use property. 1. In general, for purposes of this section, A. Property other than non-residential real property. Except as otherwise provided in this subsection, the term tax-exempt use property means that portion of any tangible property other than non-residential real property leased to a tax-exempt entity. 1. 50% shall be substituted for 35% in paragraph 1B3 thereof. And 2, an eligible educational institution, as defined in section 529E5, should not be treated as a tax-exempt entity. This clause shall not apply for purposes of determining whether a building has been substantially converted. 5. Expenditures of leasing. Any expenditure of leasing of a building if on the date the conversion is completed, the remaining term of the lease, determined without regard to any renewal periods, is less than the recovery period determined under section 168C. And then progress expenditures. In general, in the case of any building to which this subsection applies, except as provided in paragraph 3, A. If such building is self-converted property, any qualified conversion expenditure with respect to such building shall be taken into account for the taxable year for which such expenditure is properly chargeable to capital account with respect to such building. And B. If such building is not self-converted property, any qualified conversion expenditure with respect to such building shall be taken into account for the taxable year in which paid. Property to which subsection applies. A. In general, this subsection shall apply to any building which is being converted by or for the taxpayer if the normal conversion period for such building is 2 years or more, and it is reasonable to expect that such building will be a qualified converted building in the hands of the taxpayer when it is placed in service. Clauses 1 and 2 shall be applied on the basis of facts known as of the close of the taxable year of the taxpayer in which the conversion begins, or if later, at the close of the first taxable year to which an election under this subsection applies. B. Normal conversion period. For purposes of subsection A, the term normal conversion period means the period reasonably expected to be required for the conversion of the building. 1. Beginning with the date on which physical work on the conversion begins, or if later, the first day of the first taxable year to which an election under this subsection applies. And 2. Ending on the date on which it is expected that the property will be available for placing in service. 3. Special rules for applying paragraph 1. For purposes of paragraph 1, A. Component parts, etc. Property which is to be a component part of or is otherwise to be included in any building to which this subsection applies shall be taken into account. 1. At a time not earlier than the time at which it becomes irrevocably devoted to use in the building. And 2. As if, at the time referred to in Clause 1, the taxpayer had expended an amount equal to that portion of the cost to the taxpayer of such component or other property which, for purposes of this subpart, is properly chargeable during such taxable year to capital account with respect to such building. B. Certain borrowing disregarded. Any amount borrowed directly or indirectly by the taxpayer from the person converting the property for him shall not be treated as an amount expended for such conversion. C. Limitation for buildings which are not self-converted. In general, in case of a building which is not self-converted, the amount taken into account under paragraph 1b for any taxable year shall not exceed the amount which represents the portion of the overall cost to the taxpayer of the conversion which is properly attributable to the portion of the conversion which is completed during such taxable year. Carryover of certain amounts. In the case of a building which is not a self-converted building, if for the taxable year, 1. The amount which, but for clause 1, would not have been taken into account under paragraph 1b exceeds the limitation of clause 1, then the amount of such excess shall be taken into account under paragraph 1b for the succeeding taxable year. Or 2. The limitation of clause 1 exceeds the amount taken into account under paragraph 1b, then the amount of such excess shall increase the limitation of clause 1 for the succeeding taxable year. D. Determination of percentage of completion. The determination under subparagraph C1 of the portion of the overall cost of the taxpayer of the conversion which is properly attributable to conversion completed during any taxable year shall be made under regulations prescribed by the Secretary on the basis of engineering or architectural estimates or on the basis of cost accounting records. Unless the taxpayer establishes otherwise by clear and convincing evidence, the conversion shall be deemed to be completed, not more rapidly than ratably over the normal conversion period. E. No progress expenditures for certain prior periods. No qualified conversion expenditures shall be taken into account under this subsection for any period before the first day of the first taxable year to which an election under this subsection applies. F. No progress expenditures for property for year it is placed in service, etc. In the case of any building, no qualified conversion expenditures shall be taken into account under this subsection for the earlier of 1. The taxable year in which the building is placed in service, or 2. The first taxable year for which recapture is required under section 50A2 with respect to such property, or for any taxable year thereafter. 4. Self-converted building. For purposes of this subsection, the term self-converted building means any building, if it is reasonable to believe that more than half of the qualified conversion expenditures for such building will be made directly by the taxpayer. 5. Election. This subsection shall apply to any taxpayer only if such taxpayer has made an election under this paragraph. Such an election shall apply to the taxable year for which made and all subsequent taxable years. Such an election, once made, may be revoked only with the consent of the Secretary. G. Denial of double benefit. A credit shall not be allowed under this section for any qualified conversion expenditure for which a credit is allowed under section 42 or 47. Conforming amendments. Section 49A1C of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by striking and at the end of clause 7, by striking the period at the end of clause 8 and inserting and by adding after clause 8 the following new clause. 9. The portion of the basis of any qualified converting property attributable to qualified conversion expenditures under section 48F. 2. 58.2e of such code is amended by striking or 48e and inserting 48e or 48fe. Section 50B2 of such code is amended by striking "and" at the end of subparagraph C, by striking the period at the end of subparagraph D and inserting "and" by adding after subparagraph D the following new subparagraph. E. A qualified converted building to the extent of that portion of the basis which is attributable to qualified conversion expenditures. 4. Section 50B3 is amended by inserting or solely with respect to the commercial to residential credit an eligible educational institution as defined in Section 529E5 after Section 521. 5. The table of sections for subpart E of Part 4 of subchapter A of Chapter 1 of such code is amended by inserting after the item relating to Section 48E the following new item. Section 48F. Commercial to residential credit. D. Effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to qualified conversion expenditures incurred after the date of enactment in taxable years ending after such date. And theoretically, as always, we need oversight, right? And that's where Section 3 comes in. Section 3, Commercial to Residential Conversion Advisory Board. A. Establishment, not later than 1 year after the date of the enactment of this act, the Secretary of HUD shall establish an advisory board to carry out the duties described in subsection C. B. Membership. The advisory board shall be composed of not less than 20 members appointed by the Secretary. I don't know, guys. This is something I'm starting to think of more and more, that while the Secretary of HUD or the Secretary of these institutions, right, is going to have more knowledge about like which people they would need to include for this whole thing to work, whose expertise really does matter in this. But the more I think about it, the more I'm also like, I really think people should have more, like the people in that city should have more knowledge of this, should have more of like a say in this, because I don't know. I feel like at this point, we put way too much in the federal government's hands and we put way too much in the state's hands. And I think that it's part of what got us here. But I don't know. I could be wrong. But that's just something I've been thinking about as I've been seeing these bills and seeing like our current structure in our state and local and federal governments. All right. C. Duties. The advisory board shall provide logistical support, technical assistance, best practices, and training to state and local housing agencies with respect to 1. Identifying the best candidates for commercial to residential conversions that are financially and logistically feasible and meet demonstrated housing demand in localities within the state or locality. 2. Conducting floor plan and feasibility analysis for prospective commercial to residential conversions. 3. Expediting state or local regulatory processes and permitting processes to allow for faster approval and construction of commercial to residential conversions. Again, I think in terms of like expediting these processes, it's not a bad thing because these processes can take so long to even like build, let alone get approval. But we really do need to set up like a system that works, that allows for it without giving something up in like the quality or safety of these buildings, right? Or that allows for a lot of errors, even on the administrative side. 4. Reforming of local regulatory and zoning barriers to allow for more commercial to residential conversions. That's good. And 5. Identifying federal and state funding sources that can be used by localities to provide financial assistance on commercial to residential conversion projects. Also not bad. D. Authorization of appropriations. There is authorized to be appropriated to carry out this section $5 million for each of fiscal years 2025 through 2029. So I think that this bill has a lot of potential, especially because we do need more housing. We do need a more affordable housing for people. And I think that like there's a lot of little things, little details that I think once these buildings are created that need to be like that need to be adjusted or improved upon. Like when it comes to pet policies, when it comes to, but that's like getting in the nitty gritty of when these like projects are completed. But this is definitely something that is very much needed in every state. Okay. I am curious what their intake process is going to be like though, because that matters. That's going to be a big factor in this as well, especially in terms of like eliminating homelessness. But I think that like if you actually partnered up with like an emergency shelter program or emergency shelters, that you can really work on this being a big part of this being housing the homeless as well. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. This is just introduced, hasn't even been brought into the House. I mean, voted in the House, not voted in the Senate. So you still got time. If you think it should be passed, you know what to do. But with that being said, that's the end of this bill. I have a lot of shorter ones that are really important that I found that I'm going to go over. So we're going to be getting through a good amount of videos this week. So looking forward to that. And guys, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, Substack, Insta, YouTube, because I post these videos on YouTube. And if you want more of a laid back environment, YouTube is a place to go because I stream there as well. And then of course, buy me a coffee if you guys want to support the channel, because I do all this in my free time. Much appreciated. With that being said, you guys have a nice day, because it is like morning. It's not even noon yet here. But you guys have a nice day, and I will see y'all in the next video.